August 6th, 1945, 8:15 in the morning. Imperial General Headquarters, Tokyo. A single secret message from Hiroshima would destroy 3 years of carefully built beliefs about war. What the Japanese military leaders read in that message would force them to face a truth they had ignored the entire war. America hadn't been fighting with all its power. They had been holding back. The secret war room beneath the Imperial Palace sat 90 feet underground, protected by thick concrete walls 4 feet thick. On the morning of August 6th, 1945, the room buzzed with the normal sounds of a war they were losing. Field Marshal Shinroku Haru's morning meeting had become a daily routine of bad news. At exactly 8:15 in the morning, a communications officer named Lieutenant Colonel T-Shirt Yamamoto rushed through the steel door without bowing like he was supposed to. In his hands, he carried a secret message that would completely change how Japan's military leaders understood the war they had been fighting. The message was incomplete, sent by the Hiroshima Military Command before all communication stopped. Entire city destroyed by single bomb. Blast size bigger than all previous bombing. Unknown weapon type. Casualties terrible. Request immediate. The message ended in the middle of a sentence. General Yoshiro Yamizu, chief of the Imperial General Staff, read the message 3 times. His first thought was that American B-29 planes had done the biggest regular bombing attack of the war, maybe 500 planes dropping firebombs at the same time. The math seemed impossible any other way. Hiroshima was a city of 350,000 people spread across 27 square miles. But more reports arriving throughout the morning told a different story. Weather scouts had reported only 3 B-29s over Hiroshima that morning. 3 planes, not 300. 3. Admiral Toyoda, chief of the Naval General Staff, stood at the huge wall map, tracking every known American military force in the Pacific. His intelligence team had become very good at guessing American operations. They knew bomber groups, typical bomb loads, and expected damage. Nothing in 3 years of air war suggested 3 planes could destroy an entire city. By 10 o'clock in the morning, scout planes trying to reach Hiroshima reported something never seen before. Pilots described a mushroom-shaped cloud rising over 40,000 feet, visible from 150 miles away. The cloud glowed with colors they had never seen, purples and oranges that seemed to pulse with inner light. Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo received the first eyewitness report at 11:30 in the morning from a railway worker who had been 15 miles outside Hiroshima. The man's story, written down by Togo's secretary, described a flash brighter than 1,000 suns followed by a pressure wave that knocked trains off their tracks. He reported that the entire city center had simply disappeared, replaced by a firestorm visible from mountains. The afternoon meeting of the Supreme War Council started at 2 o'clock in the afternoon in complete silence. Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki, who had survived multiple murder attempts for even suggesting peace talks, read the collected reports. His hands shook slightly as he placed the papers on the table. "Gentlemen," Suzuki began, "we must think about what this means." General Anami, the Minister of War and the strongest supporter for continuing the fight, spoke first. "American lies. They want us to believe they have weapons they don't have. Hiroshima was destroyed by regular bombing, and they're using tricks. 3 planes, enemy sent." Admiral Toyoda interrupted, something he would never have done normally. "Our radar tracked them. Our watcher saw them." 3. The room fell silent as the meaning settled over them like volcanic ash. For 3 years, Japanese military thinking had been built on a single idea. American industrial power could be beaten by Japanese spiritual strength and smart fighting. The Americans could make more ships, more planes, more tanks, but Japanese forces would fight so fiercely that American deaths would become too much for their people to accept. This thinking had guided every decision since Pearl Harbor. When American factories produced 300,000 planes, Japan's leaders told themselves that Japanese pilots, though outnumbered, would fight with 10 times the spirit. When American shipyards launched cargo ships so quickly that they built more than German submarines could sink, Japan told itself that American sailors lacked the warrior's heart. But a single bomb that could destroy a city suggested something far more troubling. It suggested that American industrial and scientific ability had reached levels that made Japanese resistance not just difficult, but pointless. It suggested that America had been developing weapons in secret while at the same time fighting a war across two oceans. It suggested that everything Japan's military leaders believed about modern war was outdated. Intelligence officer Colonel Hideaki Sato presented the afternoon's report at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. His team had been counting American industrial power since 1941, and the numbers had been always terrifyingly accurate. America had produced 88,410 tanks during the war. Japan had produced 6,450. America had built 41 aircraft carriers. Japan had built 15. American shipyards had launched cargo ships so quickly that they built more than German submarines could sink. But Sato's new calculation suggested something that completely broke their understanding. If, he said, voice barely above a whisper, if the Americans could destroy entire cities with single bombs, then they have scientific abilities that make number comparisons meaningless. They are not fighting the same war we are fighting. Foreign Minister Togo added what everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to say. And if they have one such bomb, we must think they have more. The Japanese understanding of American power had been shaped by a series of carefully built beliefs that began long before Pearl Harbor. These beliefs, written down in countless staff meetings and war plans, would all fall apart within days of Hiroshima. But to understand what the High Command finally realized, one must first understand what they had convinced themselves was true. In November 1941, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the Combined Fleet, had given a most accurate assessment of American industrial ability that any Japanese leader would offer during the entire war. His warning, written in naval staff minutes, was clear. I can run wild for 6 months or a year, but I have absolutely no confidence for the second or third year. Yamamoto had lived in America. He had studied at Harvard and served as a naval officer in Washington. He had toured American factories and seen the industrial power firsthand. His calculations were not based on hope or nationalist passion, but on cold math. America's steel production alone was more than Japan's total industrial output. American oil reserves were basically unlimited compared to Japan's dangerous dependence on imports. But Yamamoto's warnings were completely ignored by the very staff now sitting in the underground bunker thinking about Hiroshima's destruction. The Army's war planning documents from 1941, found in files after the war, showed the different story that military leadership had believed. American industrial power would be stopped by 3 things. First, distance. Japan's conquest would create a defensive area so huge that American supply lines would break under their own weight. Every ship, every plane, every bullet would need to travel 5,000 miles across dangerous ocean before reaching battle. Japan could support its forces from nearby conquered lands while America wore itself out in impossible supply chains. Second, morale. American society was soft, individualistic, and unable to handle heavy losses. Japanese military thinking assumed that after losing 30,000 to 40,000 men, American public opinion would demand peace talks. The Japanese soldiers' willingness to die would outlast America's willingness to fight. Third, tactical advantage. Japanese forces, through better training, warrior spirit, and smart fighting, would cause death ratios that made American number advantages meaningless. 1 Japanese soldier would equal 3 to 4 Americans in battle effectiveness. These assumptions have been tested and found wrong at every single battle of the Pacific War. Yet Japanese High Command had always reinterpreted defeats as proof of their theories, needing small adjustments rather than complete change. At Midway in June 1942, Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers in a single day. The official assessment blamed bad luck and tactical mistakes, not American code-breaking skill or the basic weakness of Japan's carrier-focused plan. The underlying assumption that Japanese forces could overcome number disadvantages stayed intact. At Guadalcanal from August 1942 to February 1943, Japanese forces discovered that Americans could maintain supply lines across huge distances and could match Japanese soldiers in jungle fighting. The official assessment blamed local commanders for not enough fighting spirit, not the impossibility of the war situation. The underlying assumption that American society would break under continued deaths stayed intact. By August 1945, every major assumption had been completely proven wrong by reality. Yet senior leadership had never formally admitted this. General Anami's continued support for fighting to the last citizen represented not stupidity, but the logical end point of beliefs that had never been properly questioned. The afternoon of August 6th marked the first time in the entire war that Japan's Supreme War Council faced their false beliefs directly. Intelligence Colonel Sato presented what he called the reality assessment, a document his team had put together over the previous 6 months, but had been stopped from presenting until now. The numbers were devastating. American plane production in 1944 alone was more than Japan's total production for the entire war. American shipyards were building small carriers faster than Japan could train pilots. American ammunition factories made more shells in a week than Japan's factories made in a month. But Sato's most damning statistics involved scientific research. His intelligence network had documented American research facilities employing over 130,000 scientists and engineers working on military technology. Japan's similar effort employed about 6,000. American research universities, Harvard, MIT, Berkeley, Chicago, had larger physics departments than Japan's entire scientific community. The atomic bomb, Sato explained, required facilities that we could not have built even if we had known how. The Americans built entire cities in secret. Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Hanford, Washington, Los Alamos, New Mexico. These facilities used more electricity than major Japanese cities. They employed 130,000 workers. The Manhattan Project cost $2 billion, more than Japan spent on its entire war effort in 1944. Foreign Minister Togo asked the question that would echo through later war crimes trials and historical study. How could we not know? Sato's answer was uncomfortable but accurate. We knew, Foreign Minister. Our intelligence services reported on American industrial growth continuously. We intercepted communications about large-scale secret projects. We documented their scientific hiring efforts. But every report was dismissed as exaggeration or lies. We chose not to know because knowing would require admitting that we could not win. Admiral Toyoda added his own bitter assessment. The Americans, he said, fought this war with one hand tied behind their back. They fought Germany and Japan at the same time while developing weapons we cannot understand. They produced more war material than we thought physically possible while keeping their civilian economy at levels that were better than peacetime production. They're not just stronger than us. They are operating on a different level of civilization. This admission that America represented not just greater strength, but a different category of ability marked the basic shift in understanding. For 4 years, Japanese propaganda had portrayed Americans as materialistic and weak, dependent on machines because they lacked spiritual strength. The atomic bomb showed this story as terribly wrong. The psychological impact went beyond simple military calculation. Cabinet Secretary Hizutsun Sakamizu wrote in his diary that evening, "We have been fighting an enemy we never understood. We assumed they thought as we thought, that their society worked as ours worked, that their limits matched our limits. Hiroshima proves we were fighting blind." August 7th, 1945, began with confirmation that made Hiroshima seem even more unbelievable. Scout planes that finally got through the radiation zone sent photographs that would circulate among high command within hours. Major Sun Kitamura, the pilot who flew the first successful scout mission, reported weather conditions he had never seen. Updrafts so powerful they threw his plane 2,000 feet higher in seconds, air temperatures that broke his instruments, and visibility blocked by smoke that rose in a column to the stratosphere. The photographs developed by 11 o'clock in the morning showed something that military analysts at first refused to believe. The city center, about 4 square miles, had been completely flattened. Not destroyed in the normal sense, where rubble and building foundations stayed, but flattened to bare earth. Structures had been vaporized. The scout team guessed that everything within a mile of the blast center had stopped existing in any recognizable form. Intelligence analysts compared these pictures to regular bombing results. The most devastating regular raid of the war, the Tokyo firebombing of March 9th to 10th, 1945, had needed 334 B-29 bombers dropping 1,665 tons of firebombs over 3 hours. Hiroshima's destruction was worse than that raid's damage, done by a single bomb from a single plane in a single instant. The Supreme War Council met again at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on August 7th with new intelligence that completely changed the war landscape. Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov had called Japanese Ambassador Naoto Sato to the Kremlin at midnight Moscow time. The message was brief. The Soviet Union would consider itself at war with Japan starting August 9, 1945. This announcement destroyed Japan's final war hope. For months, Japanese diplomacy had worked desperately to get Soviet help for peace terms. The fantasy was that Stalin, never fully trusted by his American and British allies, might arrange a deal that kept some Japanese territory and prevented occupation. The Soviets entering the war eliminated this possibility completely. General Anami's face, according to multiple witnesses, went pale as the meaning registered. Japan now faced enemies on all fronts with no chance of negotiated peace. American atomic weapons from the east, Soviet armies from the north, British Commonwealth forces from the south, and Chinese resistance continuing in occupied territories. The empire that had once stretched from the borders of India to the mid-Pacific was being compressed back toward the home islands with crushing force. Foreign Minister Togo presented the harsh reality. We have 3 choices: surrender unconditionally, fight until every city is destroyed by atomic weapons, or fight until Soviet and American forces invade and Japan stops existing as a nation. There are no other options. August 8th brought incomplete intelligence about Soviet movements. The Red Army had launched a huge attack into Manchuria with overwhelming force. The Guangdong Army, once the elite group of Japanese military power, was being completely destroyed. Soviet tank columns advanced 50 miles on the first day, meeting resistance that fell apart before forces that had learned their trade, destroying Nazi Germany. The Manchurian operation showed another uncomfortable truth about American power. The Soviets were equipped with thousands of American vehicles, trucks, and communications equipment provided through Lend-Lease. American industrial ability had not only supported its own forces across 2 oceans, but it also equipped allies on a scale that seemed impossible by Japanese standards. A single American program, Lend-Lease, had provided more material to Soviet forces than Japan's entire industrial output for the war. At 11:02 in the morning on August 9th, a second atomic bomb destroyed Nagasaki. The communication from the Nagasaki Regional Command was even shorter than Hiroshima's. Second atomic attack. City destroyed. Casualties terrible. Then silence. The Supreme War Council emergency meeting that afternoon turned into something never before seen in Japanese military behavior. Open admission of complete war failure. Navy Minister Admiral Mitsumasa Yanai spoke with remarkable honesty for a military officer in that environment. The Americans have shown that they can destroy our cities at will, one by one, until nothing remains. They have shown the ability to continue this forever. We cannot defend against weapons we cannot find until they explode. Our anti-aircraft systems are useless. Our fighter planes cannot stop what they cannot find. Our civil defense preparations are pointless. Army Chief of Staff General Yamazu added his own assessment, one that would have been considered defeatist heresy weeks earlier. The atomic bomb changes basic military calculations. Gathered forces become targets. Cities become targets. Our plan of fighting to the last citizen assumes Americans must invade to occupy. But if they can destroy cities without invasion, our entire defensive thinking becomes outdated. They can simply eliminate Japan from existence without ever stepping foot on our soil. Intelligence estimates presented that evening calculated that America likely had between 3 and 7 more atomic bombs with production ability for more. Even if this estimate was high, even if America had only one more weapon, the war meaning stayed the same. Continued resistance was suicide. Cabinet Secretary Sakamizu recorded the emperor's private comments from a meeting that evening. His Majesty said that the unbearable must be endured. The atomic bombs have shown that continued resistance will result in the complete destruction of the Japanese people. We must accept terms that preserve the nation, even if those terms are painful beyond measure. The phrase, unbearable must be endured, would become the foundation for Japan's surrender announcement. But the path from this private imperial admission to actual surrender would require dealing with military opposition that stayed fierce despite overwhelming evidence. August 10th brought the formal Japanese surrender offer sent through Swiss diplomatic channels. The message was conditional. Japan would accept the Potsdam Declaration terms provided the emperor's power was kept. The American response delivered August 12th was deliberately unclear. The emperor would be subject to the supreme commander of Allied powers, but his final status would be decided by the freely expressed will of Japanese people. This unclear language created the final crisis. Military hardliners led by General Anami saw this as unacceptable. They argued for continuing resistance despite atomic weapons. Their position was no longer based on victory chances, but on preserving national honor through destruction rather than accepting occupation and foreign judgment. The surrender formalities went through late August and early September 1945, but the psychological change of Japanese high command was complete by August 16th. What followed was not just military defeat, but a complete rethinking of everything Japanese leadership had believed about modern war, industrial ability, and their own place in the global order. The formal surrender ceremony aboard USS Missouri on September 2nd, 1945, brought Japanese representatives face to face with the physical show of American power they had always underestimated. Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu, who signed the surrender document, recorded his thoughts in his diary. The harbor was filled with American warships, as far as one could see. Hundreds of ships. Aircraft filled the sky in groups that blocked the sun. The Americans displayed their power not through threats, but through simple presence. This fleet represented a fraction of their total military force, yet was more than everything Japan had at the peak of our strength. General Yashijiro Yamizu, representing the Imperial General Staff, noted the ceremony's location was itself a lesson in American ability. We surrendered aboard a battleship built in American shipyards in less time than it took us to plan a single naval operation. The Missouri was one of dozens of capital ships they built while at the same time fighting across 2 oceans and developing atomic weapons. We prepared for war for a decade. They prepared for 15 months and buried us. The American occupation force began arriving in late August, and Japanese military observers documented details that reinforced their new understanding. The equipment, organization, and supply lines showed abilities that previous intelligence reports had accurately described, but high command had refused to believe. A single American infantry division moved with more trucks than the entire Imperial Army had. American supply operations delivered fresh food to troops while Japanese forces had been starving. American medical facilities treated injuries that Japanese military medicine considered untreatable. Intelligence Colonel Sato put together his final report in September 1945 titled, "Why We Lost," an assessment of strategic miscalculation. The document, now kept in Japan's National Institute for Defense Studies, gave brutal honesty. We lost the war in December 1941 when we attacked an enemy we did not understand. Every battle after that was simply the working out of unavoidable math. American industrial ability was more than ours by factors of 10 to 20 in every category. Their scientific establishment was larger than our entire educated population. Their resource base was basically unlimited, while ours depended on conquests we could not keep. We fought believing spirit could beat material. We were wrong. The American Occupation Administration, led by General Douglas MacArthur, gave Japanese officials access to information about American war production that confirmed their worst realizations. The United States had produced 88,410 tanks, 257,000 artillery pieces, 2,434,000 trucks, 17 million rifles, and 41 billion rounds of ammunition. More amazing, they did this while keeping civilian living standards that were better than Japanese peacetime prosperity. Former Prime Minister Suzuki, in conversations recorded by American occupation historians, explained what Japanese leadership had finally understood. We thought we were fighting a nation of merchants who valued profit over honor, comfort over sacrifice. We were terribly wrong. We were fighting the most productive civilization in human history, one that could at the same time support mass consumer economy and total war production. They didn't choose between butter and guns. They produced both in amounts we found impossible to understand. The Manhattan Project's details, slowly revealed to Japanese scientists through occupation channels, provided the most humbling lesson. The project had employed 130,000 people and cost $2 billion, more than Japan's entire 1944 military budget. It required building facilities that used more electricity than major cities. It involved theoretical physics at levels Japanese scientists hadn't imagined possible. The atomic bomb wasn't just a weapon, but evidence of scientific and industrial ability that placed America in a different category of civilization. Admiral Toyoda's final assessment, written in 1946 for occupation historians, captured the complete reversal of Japanese military thinking. We began the war believing American democracy made them weak. Their diversity made them disunited. Their wealth made them soft. We ended the war understanding that democracy enabled innovation, diversity provided talent, and wealth funded abilities we couldn't match. Every assumption we held was not just wrong, but exactly backwards. The psychological impact on military leadership showed in different ways. Some, like General Anami, chose death rather than living with the reality of how badly they had miscalculated. Others, like Admiral Yanai, became supporters for complete demilitarization, arguing that Japan's militaristic culture had led to terrible war blindness. Most simply struggled to reconcile the warriors they believed themselves to be with the reality that they had led their nation into an unwinnable war through systematic self-deception. Japanese historians working under occupation supervision began documenting how completely intelligence reports had been ignored. Accurate assessments of American production had been dismissed as defeatism. Warnings about American scientific abilities had been stopped as harmful to morale. Evidence that Japan was losing the war had been reinterpreted as temporary setbacks, needing more fighting spirit. The entire command structure had created an information environment where truth became treason and optimism became policy. The final lesson Japanese high command learned was perhaps the most bitter. American power had not been fully used. The United States had fought a two-ocean war while keeping large forces in reserve, developing next-generation weapons, and preparing for conflicts that might follow. The atomic bombs represented not America's maximum effort, but what they could do while at the same time doing a dozen other things. Japanese forces had fought with total commitment of every resource. American forces had fought with comfortable margins everywhere. By 1947, when American occupation officials did comprehensive interviews with former Japanese military leadership, the change was complete. General Yumizu's testimony to occupation historians summarized what Japanese high command had finally understood. We lost because we never understood our enemy. We gave them our weaknesses, limited resources, narrow industrial base, inflexible thinking when they had the opposite. We believed our own propaganda when we should have believed our intelligence services. The atomic bomb was not the cause of our defeat. It was the final proof that we had been defeated from the moment we started fighting an enemy we never truly understood. We learned too late that courage cannot defeat chemistry, Spirit cannot overcome steel, and determination means nothing when facing an enemy who has both determination and 10 times your ability to give it physical form.